Dr Philippa Whitford.
Very much, Mr Speaker. As the Honourable Lady for Kingston upon Hull said, 2,400 people have died from the worst disaster in NHS history. Now, this was due to a shortage of blood and clotting factors that led to the NHS sourcing products from America. The problem is that people with haemophilia in men or von Willebrand's disease in women who get factor 9, these concentrates are made from thousands of samples. And the moment you have one or two people within that collection, you are starting to have the virus. And that's why they are affected at a much higher rate than people who had a single blood transfusion. And the problem is, we're talking about decades that this goes back and has not been properly dealt with, as has been mentioned in the Chamber already. Now, in the 2 years I've been in the House, we've had multiple debates, statements and urgent questions on this issue, and I too pay tribute to the Honourable Lady for keeping at it with the all-party group. But most of that has been around support, and it was only last July that finally this government came forward with a strengthened support package for these people. It's important to recognise this is not compensation. These are ex gratia support payments. They do not recognise the loss and suffering of the victims of contaminated blood. And that only seemed to come about after the Scottish Government came up with a much more generous package in a much larger lump sum, ongoing payments, and very particularly 75% pension to the spouse and bereaved families, who at the moment still do not get sufficient support here in England. And that is not right. The idea that someone who loses a partner to this scandal is not compensated. Now, what we heard in March of this year, a mere 7 months after that, was that the government was consulting on perhaps restricting who all would qualify for the highest payments, and that these payments would not be subject to index linking. The youngest victim remaining is approximately 35. They have a whole lifetime to go through. It may be a shortened lifetime in comparison to us, but we cannot have that people are suddenly left in poverty further down the line. And these things need to be dealt with. And I welcome the Minister's commitment that the CPI index linking will actually go ahead. We may need a debate on support, but that isn't what this debate is about. I give way.
I am very grateful. I'm reluctant to interrupt the Honourable Lady's remarks, but the support extends to Wales as well, not just to England, of course. And of course, it is a £10,000 payment, as far as I understand, for spouses in Wales as well. Is it her understanding that, in terms of reference of the inquiry, will include the actions of governments in Wales and in Scotland and possibly Northern Ireland, as well as what has happened in England? I had intended to ask the Minister, but couldn't get in.
Well, obviously, the Scottish Government had an inquiry, the Penrose inquiry, but I would assume, as the Minister has committed to, that any inquiry going forward will look at the whole of the UK. It must be remembered that the decisions that led to this were taken here and in Whitehall. This is before devolution. Governments like the Scottish Government have tried to step up and support their constituents and citizens who've been affected by it, but actually getting the answers to what caused this is in this place. I'll give way, but I won't be able to give way too much.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and would she agree that the sense of lack of trust has been enhanced by documents such as the self-sufficiency in blood product, which was a DOH document, but which many people felt was inaccurate and indeed outright lies?
I think obviously all of these things will have to be looked at by the inquiry itself. And I think documents, patients' records, things that were altered, things that were hidden, and things that are hiding behind public interest barriers now all need to, as in the case of Hillsborough, be opened up so that light is shone into that. Now, the Penrose inquiry was Scotland only. The Department of Health was invited to take part at the time and turn it into a nationwide, UK-wide inquiry, but they declined. And Penrose did not have the right to summon either documents or people, and that was one of its key weaknesses. Now, I remember at the time in the 80s when this scandal started to unfold, and as a surgeon who, of course, uses blood on their patients, I remember how shocked I was at the mere thought that an action I might have taken could have harmed a patient that I was looking after. And I certainly set about in my elective surgery to chase every single blood cell to avoid spilling blood, using electrocautery, all sorts of modern techniques. And if you wheel out my staff from my theatre, they'll moan about how long I used to spend doing that. But if you're dealing with someone who's been hit by a bus, you have no choice. I remember a criticism in response to Penrose in 2015, saying they were surprised that clinicians showed so much trust in the quality of blood. But a clinician who's using hundreds of drugs and implants and machines and blood products must be able to trust them. We have no mechanism personally to check them. That is the role of government and all the agencies of government. That's why we have licensing and inspections, and why, when there is suspicion of harm, action must be taken. As I said, that failure to act, that hiding, that not dealing with it at the time, happened pre-devolution, and this inquiry must take account of it. In particular, we know that at a conference in 1980 in Glasgow, clinicians were already raising concerns about seeing change in liver function in patients who were receiving blood concentrate for haemophilia. There is a meeting that we've obviously all read about recently in 1981 of, this is the UK Blood Transfusion Service Research Committee, which recognised about 50 patients a year developing some form of liver damage. And yet the decision at that meeting appears to be to let that continue and simply study it and use these patients as a way of developing a test for what was known at the time as non-A, non-B hepatitis. I think it is really important in this inquiry that we ensure that we are looking at all of this. The official from the Department of Health and Social Security at that meeting would not attend Penrose. These people need to be called by this inquiry. So going forward, of course, it must include the families, the victims, so that we are sensitive to what it is they want to know. It isn't just government, but producers, and not just producers in America. I think we try to make ourselves feel better because we blame it on the States, where people bought blood, where people with addictions and poverty and prisoners were used. In the mid-70s, prisoners in this country were also used, and it is claimed that that was encouraged by the Home Office as part of prisoner rehabilitation. We need those documents. We need to understand if that decision was made. The UK producers have often been found wanting in the quality of product that they came up with. So we mustn't pat ourselves in the back and imagine that the UK product was somehow safe and this was all due to the US. We need to follow this right down and get the answers. I think that the people have been failed so many times over and over. It is crucial that this does not happen again. I think that we need to keep the government on their toes. We need to have reports back from this inquiry as it's set up so that we know what it is it's going to actually look into. Because if we fail to get answers this time, and in particular fail to actually deliver compensation for lives lost, for suffering, failure to get a mortgage or insurance, the costs of care, then we'll have failed them all over again.